Hi there, and welcome to the Skylight Books author reading series. If you'd like to learn more about us and our many upcoming author events, please visit skylightbooks.com, where you can browse our inventory, buy books, and join our Friends with Benefits Club. You can also follow us on Twitter, Tumblr, and Facebook. To speak to a real live bookseller like me, please call 323-660-1175. Thanks for your support, and enjoy.
Thank you all for coming, friends, and a few people I don't know and people I haven't seen for a long time. The launch reading was actually at Cal Poly a couple weeks ago, and there was a couple hundred people there, actually. It was really an amazing evening. And now I'm going on a tour, which is actually hard to believe, 24 cities, 31 readings, and this is the second one. I was in San Diego last night. If you're ever in La Jolla, there's a bookstore there called D.G. Will's, and it is maybe the coolest bookstore I've ever been to, even cooler than City Lights and places like that. Skylights, of course, is just second right after D.G. Will's, but they've been around for 80 or 90 years. So anyways, I'm really thrilled to be here. I'm going to read two pieces. The first one is short, maybe just 6 or 7 pages, and the other one's about 10 pages. So do those and talk a little bit about each one, and then some Q&A at the end. If you guys want to do that, that's fine too. The book is set in Pittsburgh, 1961 to 1968, and I'm 7 to 14 years old. I thought of it was more of an autobiographical novel as I was writing it. In fact, I didn't think it was even going to be a book. I just started with chapter 1 as a whim, and then it kind of built from there, and then I realized I have to decide, is everything going to be true, or am I going to make things up? And so everything's true as I remember it during those years in the early mid-'60s. And when I got the contract, we went with memoir. So it's everything true as I remember it. The first piece I want to read is set in Christmas time, 1966-67. It's Christmas Eve and Christmas Eve evening and Christmas itself. And a little background here. It's about my father. It's about Catholicism. It's about priests. It's wintertime. And my father was really an inscrutable character to me when I was growing up. He never talked to me, never talked to anyone, paced around a lot. I never quite figured him out until years later. When he was 12 years old, his mother died, and he was sent away to boarding school. There was 8 children in the family. His father was a doctor who drove a buggy around with a horse named Rosie all over the south suburbs. And his mother died, and his father immediately married his wife's sister. That's what you did back then if you had 8 kids. And the wife's sister became the stepmom, and she hated all the kids, and she did everything she could to keep them away from the father. So my father grew up not being able to speak to his father, which means when he had us, he didn't speak to us. He also, I think, suffered from clinical depression, which we didn't understand back then. And then alcoholism comes into it. In college, he graduated in 1931, and he was a fantastic actor. He played Macbeth and Hamlet and Lear, had offers all over Broadway. And his father said, "You can't do that, it's immoral. Either medicine or law, take your pick." And so he picked law because I don't think he could imagine examining other people's bodies. And he was unhappy in the law, really unhappy. So when opportunities came along in the mid-'60s to kind of make a quick buck, he used to say, he went for them. And there was a con man involved named Lou. And the first deal was around 65, 64. And there was this new phenomenon called indoor shopping malls. So at this point, they're nowhere in the country. The department stores are downtown. And urban decay, racial strife, things are happening. So the cities are dying and the stores are moving to the suburbs. Philadelphia had a shopping mall and Chicago did. And so somebody wanted to build one in the south suburbs of Pittsburgh. And this contractor went to my father and said, "Look, I got a piece of land. It's perfect. It's called the Mayfair property. You borrow the money. We'll build the mall there." So my father mortgaged the house, took out another big loan, all this money. At the last second, the deal didn't go through. They built the mall somewhere else, actually right across from my Catholic grade school. It became South Hills Village Mall. So my father lost all this money. About a year later, Lou comes back a second time and says, "I got another deal. This one's Christmas trees. We can buy all these Christmas trees up in northern Pennsylvania for $2 a piece. Bring them to the suburbs, sell them for $15. We'll make a killing." So my father borrows on the borrowings again, goes way into debt. They buy thousands and thousands of trees. And of course, they didn't have the logistics figured out. They didn't have sellers. It was a disaster. So Christmas came. The trees are rotting up north. And this is hard to believe, but it's true. And my father actually rented a piece of the parking lot from the shopping mall that had been built instead of his and sold the trees out of the lot himself that Christmas of 1966. The ironies are unbelievable. So there's this fancy downtown lawyer selling Christmas trees. I'm 12 years old, I'm helping him. My brother from med school comes home. And so the first part of the story is in that Christmas tree lot. It's Christmas Eve of that Christmas, and the following day, Christmas night. Those that are reading along, it's page 120. By Christmas Eve, almost all the trees in our lot were sold, but thousands of others still rotted in the snow-covered hills up north, which kind of ruined Christmas that year, especially when it came time to bring home a tree for ourselves. There wasn't much left to choose from, and my father was disappointed because he always liked an 8-foot tree, so the star on top would touch the living room ceiling. But nothing that tall looked very good. We had waited too long. My brother got the idea of connecting 2 trees together with a brace, a good-looking top of one tree with a good-looking bottom of another. No one will ever notice it, he said, not through all the ornaments and branches. It's silly to nail 2 trees together, my sister said, especially when we own thousands of them. My father didn't care, as long as it was 8 foot and a balsam. I didn't want to watch as my brother tried to screw the top of one tree onto another. My father didn't either, and he wandered off behind the wooden trellises we leaned the trees against in the lot. I followed, thinking I might see him taking a sip from his flask. But when I peeked around the corner, where some scrawny trees were still leaning in the graying light, my father wasn't using his flask at all. He was giving a speech, low-voiced but dramatic, as if an audience were listening. A freezing wind was blowing in my eyes, so I kept rubbing them while I watched my father speak, as if he were a different person, with language that sounded like he were in a play, maybe from his college days, when my mother said he played Hamlet in Macbeth. She said he was so good that Broadway made him offers after graduating, but my father's father, who had worked at as a country doctor, riding his buggy through the woods of South Pittsburgh to take care of people who hardly had any money, told my father he couldn't go into acting because of the immoral lifestyle, which I didn't quite understand. He told my father to choose either medicine or the law, and my father chose law, because my mother said he couldn't imagine examining other people's bodies. Behind the trellises in the freezing dusk light, he rose on his toes with hand gesturing and head tilting under his brown businessman's hat. His speech continued at just over a whisper, and his body moved from inside his heavy wool coat in a way I had never seen before, as if he were a younger man. He said something about a character named Gloucester, who wanted to kiss the king's hand, but the king had to wipe it off first because it smelled of mortality, not of pine trees. After all, I felt guilty watching him and turned back toward the tent, but I didn't want to watch my brother either, with his tree saw and hammer. So I just sat on a stump until my father walked by, looking as if nothing had happened behind the trellises, and maybe it hadn't, except it was too real for me to have imagined. How many times, I wondered, had he secretly done this before? Maybe he did it in front of Taddy Keegan, or maybe behind the piles of folders in his office where no one could see. He walked past my brother, who was wrestling with a tree between his legs, and then stopped to pull his cigarettes from his right coat pocket, the L&M side. I walked over and stood near him, wishing I could see his face, but it was hard with his collar up and black glasses and hat underneath the closing darkness. That night my brother got our tree up in the living room, but no one felt very good about it, because it really was 2 trees, even though it was hard to tell. The whole idea was too much for my mother, who refused to even look at it. When Aunt Julie and Uncle Stanley came to visit Christmas Day, Uncle Stanley stood with his Bloody Mary in hand and talked, as he always did, about the things he owned and which brands were best, like his Ford Thunderbird being better than my father's Buick that was no damn good. And my father not arguing back, but tilting his watery eyes in a way that showed contempt, until Uncle Stanley turned away. And that's when he looked at our tree. I glanced over to see the nervousness in my mother's face. "What did you do here? Put 2 trees together?" he asked, laughing, his cigarette ash falling from his mouth onto the carpet. As soon as they left, my mother announced that next year she was going to buy one of those new artificial Christmas trees, and my father said he wouldn't let her bring a plastic tree into our house. Father Sanders came to dinner that night, even though no one really wanted him there on Christmas but my father. "It's always better to be kind," my mother said. Father Sanders was a Jesuit, and for my father, that's all that mattered, because in his mind, a Jesuit was the best kind of holy man. "They are la creme de la creme," he liked to say. When I asked him what he meant by that, he said, "They are the best educated class of men in the world." But Father Sanders didn't look like creme de la creme. He didn't even look like any Jesuits we had known, who all had gray hair and red faces and shaky thin hands that looked holy, and who told stories of faraway places and amazing people they had met. Father Sanders had thin, brown, uncombed hair that my sister said was always greasy, and skin that looked almost yellow, especially his face, which was marked with little holes in his cheeks. And none of us wanted to sit next to him at dinner because all he did was smile as if something funny was going on we didn't know anything about. I had no idea how my father knew Father Sanders, especially since he lived on the other side of Pittsburgh and had no car. So when he came to dinner, we'd have to pick him up in the late afternoon and drive him all the way back at night. My older brother referred to Father Sanders as the leech, but never in front of my father. And it upset my mother, who didn't like hearing an unkind word about any priest. My brother and sister would argue about who was going to have to drive Father Sanders back home. My mother always worried Father Sanders might overhear. I never trusted anything Father Sanders said, especially when he asked to excuse himself for 20 minutes before Christmas dinner to say his office, a series of priestly daily prayers. With his drink in one hand and his little black book in the other, he headed upstairs and chose my sister's bedroom for the privacy. A few minutes later, I pretended to be looking for my sister and opened the bedroom door as if I didn't know he was in there. Next to the window, where my sister had her collection of Virgin Mary statues on a little table, Father Sanders lay on my sister's bed with his eyes closed and his drink balanced on his belly. Through the shadows, he turned to look at me for a moment with his short-lipped smile, and then turned back and closed his eyes again, his little black book still in his hand. At dinner, my mother jumped up to refill his plate with more roast beef and potatoes and Le Sueur canned peas, and Father Sanders, sweating a little from his forehead, would pause every few seconds to push his glasses back up on his nose before bending over to scoop up more food. And I kept thinking how unfair it was, because my mother told the rest of us, except for my father, to FHB, family holdback, in case there wasn't enough food, and always to leave one bite on the plate so it didn't look like we were starving, especially when we ate at other people's houses. But Jesuits, they never get enough to eat, she said, and they're always cold, which is why she gave them sweaters at Christmas, the black kind that button up the front. Jesuits will never buy a sweater for themselves, she said. But I didn't believe that and wanted to sneak into Father Sanders' rectory sometime and look into his drawers. I bet he had dozens of sweaters stashed away. His problem was probably remembering which sweater was from my mother so he could wear it when he came to dinner. One time he's bound to mess up, I thought, and my mother will notice. After dinner was over, my mother took the wine bottle away so Father Sanders wouldn't get sleepy. Then he might want to stay overnight. She'd have to drive him back in the morning. She started from the table by asking for his blessing, and that's how we knew Father Sanders' Christmas visit was coming to an end. And she whispered in my ear, "Please ride along to keep your sister company when she drives Father Sanders home." I couldn't say no, even though I didn't think my sister should have to go out in the dark on Christmas night, drive across the city on streets my mother said were icy and poorly lit. But Father Sanders never seemed to think about that. She whispered again, her breath warm on my cheek and without smell, asking me not to complain, because if Father overheard, he would want to drive Father Sanders himself, and he could fall asleep behind the wheel, like when he ran into the telephone pole on Cochran Boulevard, or when he slammed into the front of the garage one night as he arrived home. She gave me the eyeball, which meant I had to kneel down with everyone else to receive Father Sanders' blessing, even though I didn't think his blessing would do any good, because God probably wouldn't pay attention to him, and because I didn't want him to touch my head with his hands or smile down at me with his yellow, tilted teeth, and I didn't want to kneel beneath him, beneath his stained sweater and thin hair that he kept pushing across his forehead with square fingers, or glance upward at his eyes that looked away, as if you looked away, if you were steady enough to stare through him. And I couldn't imagine ever confessing to Father Sanders or asking him to pray for special things, like when my father used to ask to pray for the Mayfair. When the blessing was over, my father stood up slowly, his knees creaking, and announced, "I'll take Father Sanders home." So my mother whispered one final time without any breath at all, asking me to ride along to keep my father awake on the drive back, which is hard to do with a man who never talked to you, even if he kept asking questions like, "What are you going to do with the thousands of trees on the ground up north? Or do you think any fool can really see that Christmas tree is just two trees nailed together, like Mother said?" And I wouldn't be able to see his face in the darkened car to know if he was actually listening, unless the approaching headlights streaked across for a second. And even then, with his head drooping like it always did, and his businessman's hat and thick black glasses, you couldn't see anything. Maybe I didn't want to see his face, because on that Christmas night, my father probably had the saddest face of all. We made it safely back home in the old black Oldsmobile after taking Father Sanders across the city, and my father never spoke a word to me. In the driveway, he turned off the engine and the headlights, and then for some reason, his body just seemed to stop, as if the winding key inside him had run down. After a few moments, with him not moving in the cold stillness of our steep driveway, I felt afraid. Not of my father, but of something beyond him that seemed to make him powerless in a way I'd never seen before. Both of his gloved hands remained on the steering wheel, like he was planning on driving the car without the engine on, maybe to a place you don't need an engine to get to. And I was afraid to open my car door, because he might not open his. After a minute, he moved his hands and rested them on his thighs. I thought that was a good sign, until I realized he was just settling into a more comfortable position. Again, I thought of opening my door to see what he would do, but if he didn't move, I couldn't leave him in the car alone. And if I asked, "Dad, aren't you coming?" he probably wouldn't answer, or maybe just mumble, "In a minute, son," so no good would come of it. More minutes passed, till I wondered if he had forgotten I was even there, or if maybe he was nodding off to sleep. But he always snored when he slept, and the car engine was quiet, except for the occasional ticking coming from the engine. My father was hunched over more than normal, sort of like he was trying to draw back inside himself. What if he just wants to be alone for a while in the freezing car, I thought. And how could this be the same man who stood on his toes the night before, reciting Shakespeare on Christmas Eve, behind a row of unsold trees in the new mall parking lot? I surveyed the other houses on our street to see if anyone might be looking out, wondering why my father was still inside the car. But the houses were all dark, except for ours, which had a single lamp on in the living room that my mother kept lit until the last person went to bed. The porch light was off, probably to save electricity. People who leave the lights on had more money than brains, she said. Inside the stiffening darkness, I thought I heard my father sigh and say, "I only wanted to make a buck, son, that's all." But maybe I imagined it, and then I wasn't sure, especially since my father could talk without saying words. I guess this is it, I thought. We're just going to sit here in the Oldsmobile cold until we can't stand it anymore, except that the cold won't bother him as much. And then it didn't matter, because my father said, without turning his head, "Let's go in, son." And just like that, it was over. Well, I haven't read that section before. I don't know if I will again. The book just came out, and that's an intense section for me. So maybe just stick to things lighter. How many have been to Pittsburgh? Who's been there?
I'm from there.
You are?
I am. I was born in 66.
We are bonded, baby.
Isn't that weird? I know. I'm so excited. And I know all the references. You said Kaufman Boulevard. I know those references.
Wow.
South
How
Village.
serendipitous.
I know.
So this is Pittsburgh. Three rivers are there. The Monongahela, the Allegheny join and become the Ohio River. And right there is where the city sits. And at the point is this fountain, and the city's gorgeous the way it's laid out. But back then, it was not really like that. I mean, the city was still there, but the steel mills were going, the rivers were filthy. And this involves going down to the rivers. This is a chapter the Gettysburg Review recently published. It's called The Rivers in the Book, for those who want to look along. And it involves a character named Taddy Keegan, who figures large in the book. Early chapters of the book, the Creely brothers are these bullies who really torture me and kind of take me into their world of darkness. And chapter 3, I meet Taddy Keegan, and he's this Huck Finn character. He's charismatic, free, courageous. Probably something wrong with him. He never really looked at you. He kind of always looked past you. There was no emotional connection. But he saved me from the Creelys, not because, like in a cliched movie, he stood up and beat them up, but because I realized to him the Creelys didn't exist. And so it was like Blake says, the mind forged manacles. They're our own. We put them on our minds. And once I was with Taddy Keegan, I just realized the Eckleys don't count. Ooh, I said their real name. I can't do that back east. Their real name is Yeckley. Do you believe that? Yeckley. It's changed to Creelys in the book. As you can see, I'm still dealing with this. Consider this therapy tonight. I sweated reading about my father. So, Taddy Keegan, there's 9 kids in his family. They're a real Irish family, and my mother used to say 10 if you count the father. And they're all like out of Leave It to Beaver, and he's called the crazy Irish kid. His younger brother Timmy's just as crazy, his older brother Taddy. But I used to go up to their house, and it was a whole new world. So this story opens up, it's summer, it's July of 1968. So I'm 14. And I go to the Keegan's house, and there's a raft involved, and it involves going down to the rivers. And I think I missed the most important thing. They were building a bridge from downtown Pittsburgh over to the north side. and the bridge got started in 62, and then funding fell apart, and there was no property rights on the other side. So it just stayed two-thirds built from 63, 64, 65, 66, 67, 5 or 6 years, and became known as the Bridge to Nowhere. Finally, the funding came through, they built it, and it went to the other side, and that's where they built Three River Stadium. That's where the Steelers played all those years that they were victorious. Now that's gone, and Heinz Field is there, and now the bridge is actually called the Roberto Clemente Bridge. So in the setting of this chapter, though, it's only two-thirds built. It's the Bridge to Nowhere. It only goes about halfway across the river. I will tell you in 1 second, ma'am. 155. The rivers. I didn't hear about it until everyone was ready to head downtown. Craig McCann stopped by in a hurry, his body wiggling and his hand jabbing at his thick glasses as he stood on our front steps. He talked sideways at me. "You don't want to miss this," he said excitedly. "The Keegans are taking their two-man raft down to the rivers. Taddy says he's going to jump off the Bridge to Nowhere." Then Craig McCann ran up the street as if he were heading to an emergency and cut through the old man Hoover's yard and disappeared. A few minutes later, I was cutting through my own backyard. The June day was hot and cloudless, and the white humid sky seemed to press upon me as I made my way to Taddy Keegan's house. His older brother's cab was parked in front, a hack, Paddy Keegan called it, and Taddy and his younger brother Timmy were stuffing a deflated yellow raft and 2 plastic oars into the trunk. Paddy, who was in his 20s and one of the curly-haired Keegans, yelled in a controlled way that Taddy and Timmy seemed used to. "Hurry up, you little shits! And remember, I'm just going to drop you off downtown. You have to find your own way home." "We can take the trolley," Timmy said defiantly. "I have the 35 cents. No one said anything to me, and I wasn't sure if it was because they didn't want me there or because they were too focused on getting down to the rivers. Taddy sat up front, and without even asking, I sat down in the back seat next to Timmy. A second later, Paddy made the car explode away from the curb, and suddenly our heads jerked back. "Hey, there's McCann," I said. We could see him running down the cobbled bricks of Nacomo and waving at Paddy to stop, which he did, slamming on the brakes so hard that the back tires screeched and slapped up against the curb. Since Paddy didn't own the cab, he didn't seem to care what happened to it. "Hurry up, McCann," Paddy yelled through Taddy's open window. McCann climbed nervously in the back seat, right on top of Timmy's legs because Timmy wouldn't move over. Then they started pushing at each other, and the car took off with the door still open and McCann not all the way in. Paddy drove downtown in a way that only a cab driver would know, climbing up the steep back streets of Beachview, the car feeling hotter and hotter, even with the windows open, then bumping across the bricks and the trolley tracks that swerved the cab like an amusement park ride. All the while I kept thinking how much easier it would be to just take Liberty Avenue straight downtown. "How are you going to blow this up?" Paddy yelled in a bothered voice. "Because I'm just going to drop you off on the south side. That's it." "How about stopping at a gas station?" Taddy asked. Surprisingly, Paddy did, at the bottom of Mount Washington. But the blown-up raft didn't fit back inside the car. So Paddy said they'd have to hold it up on the roof by gripping the edges, which Taddy did from one side of the car and Timmy did from the other. "We're not going through the Liberty Tunnel," Paddy said, "because it's probably illegal with a raft on the roof. So we'll take the McArdle roadway and go over Mount Washington. I'll drive slow so you guys can hold on." We only got a little ways up the hill before Timmy's fingers couldn't hold the rubber edge any longer, and the raft blew off the roof and bounced back down the road into the cars behind us. Paddy pulled over, but before he got out, he turned around and smacked Timmy's forehead several times with the palm of his hand, calling him a useless idiot. "Ah, me Irish matey," Timmy said, as if he didn't really mind his older brother slapping his face. "Do you have to be so cruel?" "Come on, Paddy," Taddy said. "Quit giving Timmy the business. Let's go get the raft." So the two of them ran off behind the car, and Timmy continued talking the fake Irish with his eyes closed, as if we were in a trance. After putting the raft back on the roof, Taddy offered to drive so Paddy could try holding on. "You assholes ain't insured to drive my hack," Paddy said, which surprised me because he didn't say anything about we assholes being only 14. So Paddy held the raft with one hand and steered with the other, and Taddy held on to the other side. And Timmy kept mumbling Irish as the cab inched its way up Mount Washington, down the steep other side. All of Pittsburgh suddenly coming into view, and the steel mills steaming in the distance, cars tooting at us from behind until we finally stopped next to the old Pittsburgh rail station alongside the Monongahela River. The station had been closed for years, The glass roof still blackened from World War II when they painted it that way, my father said, so the German planes wouldn't see it when they came to bomb Pittsburgh. Because Pittsburgh was the industrial capital of the country, my father said, it turned out more tons of steel than any city in the world. McCann and I sat on the concrete wall, stared across the river at all the business people at Point Park, enjoying their lunch outside. This is the kind of thing you do, I thought, when you're older and out of school. Just sit around on a hot day and watch the river, stare at the city and everything else that exists beyond. You guys are on your own now, Patty said, looking back as he got inside his cab. Through the open window, he added, and be careful, you little shits. Don't get into any trouble. The car spit gravel as it took off, and in that second I realized Patty had no idea what his brother Taddy was planning to do. He probably thought Taddy and Timmy were just going to float around in the rivers, enjoy their raft, and McCann and I would just loaf around and watch them. When Taddy and Timmy finally got into the raft, they started arguing about who was in front and who was in back, until it seemed they might turn the raft over into the filthy Monongahela, and that would be the end of it. But they quieted, and Taddy let Timmy's end be the front. Paddling together, they headed across the wide brown river toward the point. What are we going to do now, McCann said. I don't know. We should go to the other side. We can watch them better. How are we going to get there? Across the Fort Pitt Bridge. But there's no walking allowed on Fort Pitt Bridge. That's why we have to run real fast, McCann said. So we streaked across the bridge, where there wasn't even a sidewalk, but only a concrete curb between the cars, racing by the railing, smelling the thick river inside the waves of heat. I never looked up or down, but only at McCann's sneakers flashing back at me in quick rhythm. When we reached the end, we ran towards the Hilton Hotel, through the pedestrian tunnel, underneath the Fort Pitt Monument, and finally up the other side, onto the lawn at Point Park. Sweating and thirsty, we didn't stop till we reached the edge of the Allegheny River, near the bridge to nowhere. Taddy and Timmy were still out in the middle of the water, where the three rivers merged together. They didn't seem to be getting anywhere with their paddling. They'd stop for a bit, as if they were giving up, then they'd paddle again without making progress. Occasionally, motorboats zoomed by, as if they didn't see Taddy and Timmy, but I could see them. After a while, they decided they couldn't make it to the bridge against the current, and turned horizontal and rowed to shore right near where McCann and I were standing. At least you made it into the Allegheny River, I said as Taddy climbed out. He didn't even look at me or say a word, but just started walking robot-like along the concrete river wall toward the bridge to nowhere. Timmy didn't say anything either, which was unusual. I couldn't tell if he was mad at his brother or just mad at the river. He started dragging the raft along the shore in a drudging way, trying to follow close behind Taddy. Eventually, Timmy re-entered the water, floated out toward the middle, where the bridge to nowhere ended in midair. While I was watching them, I lost track of Taddy Keegan. I couldn't spot him anywhere. Maybe he's already climbing the bridge, I thought. And that's when I remembered him talking one time about driving off the end of the bridge to nowhere, just like some crazy college kid did a few years before, in an old Chrysler station wagon, right through the barriers at full speed, miraculously landing unhurt on the far shore of the Allegheny River. He did it on a dare, Taddy said. That's how things get done. So Taddy thought he could do it if only someone would let him drive his car. The whole incident upset my father. It's an embarrassment, he said to Uncle Stanley, for a city with more bridges than any city in the country to have one ending in midair. After the main span was completed, there was problems with property owners on the other side, my father said, which was too bad because the bridge was supposed to lead to a new football stadium so the Steelers wouldn't have to play in lousy old Pitt Field anymore, which was up past the Hill District where my father hated to go. But the new stadium hadn't been built either. Taddy Keegan had climbed the bridge after all. I could see him moving steady along the upper level of the roadway, but the noontime crowds hadn't noticed him yet. There were so many other things for them to look at. Who was going to see a boy balanced against the handrail with his feet near the green barrels arranged at the end of the bridge to nowhere? 50 yards below, Timmy floated almost perfectly still in his small yellow raft. I looked for McCann, but he had run up toward the bridge. I decided to stay, though, because Timmy was yelling at his brother. People on the point heard him, his voice taking them right out of their unslanted sunlight. "Brother, brother," Timmy yelled. Don't jump, brother." His words sounded familiar because I had heard him talking like that before, once when I came across him and Taddy down at the creek, just as it was getting dark. I heard them before I could see them, because the dusk light was mixing it up in the evening mist. So I followed the sound of their voices across the damp grass until I was right next to the creek. They were standing inside the opening of the sewer tunnel that passed underneath the Iroquois dead end. Brother, Timmy said, how could you make a lad do such a thing? Then pay me what you owe me, Taddy said. I don't got it, brother, but I'm good for it. I'm good for it, brother. Then you have to blow me, Taddy said. They both saw me standing there at the same moment, but didn't seem to care, and continued on as if they were performing in a play, and I was only the audience. And I wasn't really there either. Their words sounded serious, but their acting was kind of funny. Maybe because I could hardly see them through the dimming gray light. But brother, Timmy said, how do I know you won't piss in me mouth? Oh, brother, you know I'm good for the money. I'd heard about blowing because everyone used the word. I just wasn't sure how it happened. But I knew it was wrong, especially between brothers. Okay, I'll do it, but without touching you, brother, Timmy said. The sound of the creek water was louder than usual. Then a truck passed by up in Gilkison Road and drowned out even the creek water. When Taddy unzipped his pants, I thought about leaving, but I wanted to know what they did. I looked up toward Gilkison Road and thought how it was a good thing little Kenny wasn't there. When I looked back, Timmy was bending over inside the tunnel darkness, getting ready to put his mouth around it without touching, because then it wouldn't be a sin. I heard his voice blow twice, and he suddenly stood up, stepped outside the tunnel onto the creek. Now, we're even Stevens, brother, right? Even Stevens. Taddy didn't say anything, but turned and headed inside the tunnel. It was too dark to see him, but I could hear his feet splashing through the water, the sound gradually fading, until it was lost inside the rolling creek water. Timmy stepped onto the grass and walked past me as if he didn't see me, as if I were behind a one-way glass, and he headed towards KAUFMAN'S HIll and his home beyond. When Taddy didn't answer, Timmy repeated, brother, don't jump. I'm going to jump, Taddy finally yelled back. He was standing on top of the bridge railing, leaning against the last suspension pole, his hair sticking straight up from the sweat and his arms raised as if he were signaling triumph. Some of the point people cupped their hands over their eyes to see him better through the noon sunlight. Timmy somehow stood up in the little raft and yelled the same thing again, and Taddy yelled back in the same way, and it went on like that for a while, until everyone at the point was forced to focus on the two kids and their Irish acting that may have seemed real to some of them. But I knew the difference. I had heard Timmy talk like that other times too, in our backyard with my father one time. It was a warm night. My father was listening to the ball game on his little transistor radio that stood in its leather case on the garden wall. Through my third-floor window, I could hear the hurried baseball announcer's voice, but not his words, and then Timmy Keegan's crazy Irish yelling. I went down to the second floor and then halfway down to the first floor, stopping on the landing. Through the window, I could see Timmy Keegan standing on the flagstones in the lower backyard. Instead of pacing around smoking cigarettes and listening to the game, my father was answering back in the same crazy Irish, like he knew it somehow. I could see them fairly well through the screen, even though it was already dark inside. It was strange because Timmy never visited my house. Maybe he was just cutting through our yard and ran into my father. The exchange ended quickly when my mother opened the back door and told them to quiet down. They were scaring the neighbors, even though she really didn't like the crabby old Macbeths who lived next door. Timmy ran through the poplar trees in our upper backyard. My father came inside, where my mother sat at the gray kitchen table paying the bills. "Mother, stop being at me," he said loudly. She jumped up to close the window, even though it was a warm night, because she hated yelling, didn't want the neighbors to hear. My father headed into the dining room to pace there instead, in the almost darkness, because no one had put the lamp on yet. Missing the ball game, still playing on the transistor radio outside, he smoked in circles around the dark mahogany table that had been polished by Lorraine until it shined. So you could see, even in the dim light, my father's image inside the dark wood and then back out of it, circling around, rubbing his fingers nervously against his palms, his slick back hair shiny in the window light, and the gray cigarette smoke rising silvery, circling with emotion all its own in the twilight room before fading into the dark corners. My father's head down the whole time, except when he looked away for a second as he made the turn to pace back the other way. Still floating under the bridge to nowhere, Timmy Keegan yelled again, Brother, don't jump!" But Taddy Keegan was already gone. And I was almost too late to see, because of the last dark shape of him against the brightness, his arms still above his head through the downfall sunlight into the Allegheny River that looked black and distant under the noon sky. He stayed underwater a long time, so long that most of the people at the point began to believe he wasn't coming up again. and I started counting the seconds to see how long he could last. I thought of yelling out to Timmy, who was peering over in his raft in the dark water. He would give the raft a little spin, and then look some more. And I wonder why he didn't just jump in and try and save his brother, unless maybe this was part of their act too. I considered swimming out myself into the steel mill polluted water because Taddy had saved me from drowning in the creek when we rode truck tires after a storm. He pulled me by my hair until I was free of the current. So I started running upriver, kicking my shoes off along the way, so I was ready to jump in and trying to remember my junior safety lessons so I'd be able to save Taddy Keegan if I found him. And that's when he shot up out of the water without his shirt on, like a white-bodied fish, right next to the raft. All the people at the point clapped as Taddy climbed in, as if it were the end of a stage show, and he and Timmy started screaming, "Brother, brother!" They hugged each other and kissed on both cheeks and hugged again, and the point people clapped again. Typical Keegan crap, I thought. And it went on until the point people started losing interest because in their minds the boys were safe now. There was nothing else to worry about. Meanwhile, the boys were already floating away on the currents of the Allegheny River, heading toward the Ohio River. I had no idea what to do. The sun seemed to get hotter every second, and there weren't any ripples of wind on the river, but the currents were still there, taking Taddy Keegan away no matter what. He and Timmy drifting without using the oars. I watched them as they made a little turn and entered the Ohio River, and then they disappeared behind some buildings. They'll keep drifting west, I thought, until they come to Neville Island, where they'll get out and try and take the bus home. But they'll have to leave the raft behind, and Taddy won't want to do that. So they'll just keep on drifting right past Neville Island. I wanted to yell, "Taddy, Taddy!" But I didn't know why, and it was too late for that. Most of the business people were heading back to work. The ones left behind seemed to have already forgotten about the boy who jumped off the bridge to nowhere. I stayed longer, sitting on the river wall, trying to fool myself into not worrying about how I was going to get home. Craig McCann had already left for his father's office downtown. But I didn't want to go to my father's office in the Frick building, see him pacing around the piles of papers and folders, stopping for a moment to say, "Hi, son," without any surprise in his voice or face, and then continuing his pacing. And I couldn't call my mother because she didn't know where I was. So I'd have to take the trolley home alone, even though I'd never done that before, and I only had a quarter. I found myself walking across Point Park as if I wasn't in charge of my own body, back through the pedestrian tunnel, Hilton Plaza, to a trolley stop on Liberty Avenue. 4238 Mount Lebanon Beachview, I remembered. That was the streetcar I needed to take. And I kept thinking it was too bad Taddy Keegan wasn't there, because he would find an Irish way to get us on the red trolley car, and we'd look out the window together at all the things that existed beyond. Some sparrows were making a racket underneath the roof of the trolley stop, bothering me so much I looked around for a stone to throw at them. And that's how I found an old nickel on the pavement by the curb. I only need another nickel now, I thought. The birds kept up their noise, flying in and out of the nest up in the rafters, like it was an exciting thing to do. I thought about throwing the nickel at them, but instead walked around with my head down, looking for another nickel. Maybe I should just sneak onto the trolley, I thought, because that's what Taddy Keegan would do. But if I can just find a nickel. I tried using my eyes without dropping my head, so no one would know what I was doing. And I kept thinking, the trolley could be here any minute. But maybe the nickel won't matter that much to the conductor man, I thought, and he will let me take the 4238 for just 30 cents, and then I will make it home. Thank you. You guys have been terrific. And that was about 35, 40 minutes. Is that good? So, thank you very much. Anybody has any questions or anything else? Comments?
Where do you think your mother got her penchant for the aphorisms, and did that continue?
Gosh, that's a really good question. We just thought they were kind of born sui generis with her. I don't know. I mean, her mother was supposedly a fantastic woman, but she was dead before I had any memory of her, so I'm thinking probably her mother, but we always thought it all originated with my mother, and there was a million of them. And the funny thing is, we all laughed at them and made fun of them. And now I have a 14-year-old daughter, and I find myself using all those expressions. You know, people say, when somebody dies and is close to you, they always say, "Don't worry, she'll always be with you." And you always think, "Oh, that's just crap." But they are, not in like a ghost sense, but with everything they've ever told you, is still alive, and that's real, you know. Mr. Bloom, thank you.
When did you leave Pittsburgh and where did you go to school?
I left at 18, and I went with my high school teacher who was avoiding the draft by teaching at our high school. He looked just like John Lennon. And he drove me to Cape Cod, and I took a boat over by myself to Martha's Vineyard and got a job there in 1972. And I never went back home again. I went to Holy Cross College that fall, and then I would work in Martha's Vineyard in the summer as a tour bus driver. Went to graduate school, 77 to 82. In between, lived in Paris for a year. My PhD in 82. What's that?
Where was graduate school?
Boston College. And then I finished in 82. 83, I got a job at Boston University. Taught their tenure track for 5.5 years and got fired in the middle of my tenure review for my politics, which is another story. And then I taught at MIT as a visiting professor, and then I came to Cal Poly in 89, and I've been there ever since, yeah. Well, if you know Howard Zinn, do you guys know Howard Zinn? His blurb is on my book. He and I were very, very close, really like father-son. And I met him at Boston University in the early 1980s. It was 83, 84. I got elected to the Senate, and I got elected to be in charge of the Student Life Task Force. There's a couple of things. I'll give you one really, I think, anecdote that I think is just unforgettable. There was a thing called divestiture going on. I don't know if anybody remembers that, but a lot of corporations, schools had money invested in South Africa. And the whole idea was if you divest, South Africa will crumble and apartheid will end. So the divestiture movement came to Boston University, which had tons of money invested in South Africa. And we were trying to pressure the president to get the money out of there, and he wouldn't. So the students came to me, and they said, what can we do? And I said, well, let's go to Howard. He'll have an answer. I had met Howard earlier over something else, and we'd become pretty close. And we were fighting the tyrannical president, John Silber, that was there. And Michael knows this because he went to BU a little bit before that. Silber tried to get something passed so he could fire professors if they were doing something in their private life they didn't like. He tried to close down the nursing college because women were uneducable. I mean, he was just amazing. So the students came to me. I went to Howard, and we said, let's build a shanty right there in the UU Plaza. And you can live in it over the weekend, just like the poor blacks are living in South Africa. And the students loved it, so they got a permit to build a shanty on Friday and take it down on Sunday for 2 days. And they brought in the corrugated metal and the cardboard. There's about 20 or 30 of them, and they lived there through the weekend. They, peed and went to the bathroom right there. It was the real deal. It was spectacular. Sunday came. What happened? They didn't want to take it down. No, this was something. And more kids came, and another shanty went up, and another shanty went up, and the Boston Globe started covering it, and the newspapers started covering it, and it was a huge happening. And John Silber, this Banana Republic tyrannical president with one arm, who hated the world and hated women, hated minorities, he said, I'm bringing the bulldozers in. And I said, we got to do something before that happens. So I asked Howard if he would speak. And so Howard spoke. We had a little forum that day, and I introduced him, and Howard got up, and by then I'd been pretty good friends with him for a couple years. And I just want to tell you what he said, because his words were so cool. He stood up there and he said, this is not about politics. Silber is trying to make it look like politics, but it's not. It's about education. If people can see, and BU is a very wealthy school with very wealthy students, if people can see how the blacks in South Africa are living, they will get it, and divestiture will happen. Education. I'll never forget he said that. President had photographers taking pictures of all the professors that were there supporting it, and he tried to fire all of them. I was one of them. And the next day the bulldozers came in. But divestiture happened, and apartheid ended 2 years later. So it had a huge effect on that. So you asked about why I got fired. That was one of the reasons. I got fired in 88, and Howard retired in 88. And we've been friends ever since, and he read the book early on before he died in 2010. And that's where I got the blurb, yeah.
I got word from Wall Street for saying this was bad investiture to Wall Street people, and they didn't, which I thought was a very sensible thing, and who got
yeah.
They didn't want to hear it.
But you're actually right. It started to work not because of moral reasons, but because they realized the companies were losing money. So it came down to money, but, it's like Lincoln in the Civil War. He did it for the wrong reason at first, and then he realized the right reason later on,
And, I know there are going to be interesting questions to follow, but could you name some of the influences of other writers that you guys have?
No, that's good. I've been publishing fiction and essays, in the 80s and early 90s. But my fiction was always about made-up things. My essays tended to be personal. And I wrote the first chapter, the one about the rat, called Rat Stick at Twilight, just kind of on a whim. And it's 7 pages long. I'm 7 years old in that scene. And that was 1995. So the book's 20 years old in that sense. And I didn't really know what was going to happen to it at that point. And I wrote a couple more chapters. And then I got into another book called Paranoia and Contentment. I didn't come back to this book till 2004, right after my mother died. And when I went back to the book with my mother died, my father had died 40 years earlier, which is another story. But when I went back to the book with both parents dead, I was way more liberated to write about, the darkness of the past that, I think of Eugene O'Neill saying that I could have never done, when they were around. I forgot what your question was. What was your question? No, what was your question? No, what was your question, though?
That was so much better than any question.
Do you remember what our question was?
It was about writers that you were...
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. So what happened is I want to get this out. I started the book before Angela's Ashes was published. That's what I want everybody to know. I started it in 95, 96. But when that book came out in 98, I think, that gave me great confidence to go back and finish the book and stay with the voice of the boy. That's what I meant to say. You can write a memoir looking back, but if you can go back and write it from then, it has way more power and presenticity. And I was kind of wondering, can I pull this off? Because if you use, the language of a 7-year-old, an 8-year-old, a 9-year-old, it can't be sophisticated language. So how do you make the writing fresh and powerful? And Angela's Ashes gave me the confidence to say, hey, I think I can do this. So I went back to the book and said, I'm going to stick with the voice of the boy all the way through. But it was slow going. I think that's why it took so long to write. I'd write it in little 2 or 3 pages at a time, and I'd revise those 2 or 3 pages over and over and over, promising myself I'm not going to go on till those are just right. And that took a long time. Yeah. Finished it in 2009, yes.
Actually, that brings up a very interesting question I have for you. As far as when you're using the voice of the boy early on, obviously kids are really naive and they're not worldly. You have this really great way of capturing yourself then and the limitations that you have. So you obviously, it's not, when I read this, I'm not seeing a man years later who has, worldly knowledge, but, just a small boy. How do you get yourself into that spot to write within that naive sense?
You were right, Trevor. That is a good question. And my answer is going to sound a little bit hokey, but I could never write this again, It sounds like science fiction. You can only go back once. I really think that's true. If you think of stories that you've told over and over again, friends and family, holidays, get-togethers, and you tell the same story, oh yeah, Lisa, that was that story of that summer when you were 12 and that weekend. After a while, all you know is the story, right? You can't remember anything else except what you've written or what you said. And I started to realize that you can go back once, and I've realized that about halfway through. So my answer to you is, it was almost like hypnosis. I would go back, that 7-year-old boy, and I would see the creek and the rat. I could see the Creelys or the Eckleys. Or I could see my father that night in the car, that piece I could barely get through. Probably shouldn't have read. And it comes alive. I don't feel like I wrote anything. I felt like I saw the image and it unfolded, and then I just kind of copied what was there. I don't ever remember thinking, what am I going to make up now? And I got to make up of course, the dialogue. I can't remember the dialogue. But I felt like it just unpacked itself through a kind of hypnosis of going back to that past moment. And I can't do that again. It's like, if any of you want to write memoir, you sell yourself out, You take a piece of yourself and you sell it to your other self. And your other self says, thank you, I'll write that down. But then that self you took it from is really gone, And I've been thinking a lot about this. I've been doing a lot of radio interviews and newspaper interviews, and I really think that's what it is. Like everything else, you pay a price, and the price is the richness of your memories are kind of gone. But I do think you have to go back and just reimagine yourself in that state, and then you will see it does unfold. I think my siblings say that's impossible. I mean, they can't remember their childhood, and they want to know how I can, But I think it depends on sensitivity and your mind and the way your imagination works. We all have different things we remember, different skills we have, and I can't operate an iPad, but I can remember when I was 7. Lisa?
Do you think that this kind of cathartic, experience that you're having, has it changed you as a father in terms of looking at your daughter?
Yeah, that's a tough one. If you read the acknowledgments, it says to my daughter Maya, who's always believed in Kaufman's Hill and now can finally read it. But I'm worried about her reading it. There's a couple scenes in there involving girls and sex, and I'm only 12 at the time, and she's now 14, and I don't want her, oh, Papa did those when he was 12. I can have some guy hyperventilate me and pass out and feel me up. I don't know what to do about that, but I gave her the book for Valentine's Day, and I said, I'm giving you this out of respect, and you have to read it and respect me, and if you have any questions, ask me about it. But I think the answer to that question is, when I wrote this, I didn't think it would get published. I'd published a lot of other things, but I didn't think, who's going to publish a literary memoir about my boyhood in Pittsburgh? And then the whole thing, of course, eventually snowballed, and this fabulous woman who's my neighbor, but who now has a national reputation as a painter, did the oil painting for the cover, which is amazing, and then she painted over for the back. It's the same painting, just painted over, and the boys are off the rock.
What's her name?
Her name is Tracy Harris. And did anybody see the movie? Remind me of your question. Let me get back in a second. Anybody see the movie The Face of Love? Came out about a year ago with Ed Harris, no relation, and Annette Bening. Annette Bening falls in love. Her husband dies, and she meets Ed Harris, who looks just like her husband, and she falls in love with this look-alike guy. And Ed Harris is a painter. And he teaches art classes here at the Los Angeles Art Museum. So she falls in love, and they get, involved. Long story short, you get to the end of the movie, you finally see all his paintings that he's been doing. But all his paintings are really by Tracy Harris, no relation. And she came to me and she said, I heard you got a book contract. I've never done a cover. Can I do the oil painting for the cover? And I said, oh my gosh, absolutely. And I gave her a shitty little black and white photo of the real Kaufman's Hill. And I said, can you make it kind of impressionistic? And you put the boys on the rock, me and Taddy Keegan. And I don't know what to say. It's just mystical what she did, It's really, really amazing.
Did you get to keep the painting?
I didn't want to ask her for it. She didn't offer it. Her paintings go for at least $10,000, so I don't want to buy it, and I don't want her to feel on the spot. But nobody else better ever buy it. If you want to buy it, she has it in her house. What was your question?
I was just asking
No.
if your relationship with Maya has somehow, it's just if you look at looking back at one's childhood,
Yeah.
I think, I don't know, it's hard to articulate in a way, but it's interesting because you're talking about your father.
Yeah.
Now you're a father.
Yeah.
And I think your relationship with your father obviously was strained, and
Yeah.
I think thinking about your own childhood somehow, and the way that you went really back. You're talking about kind of only being able to go back once.
Right.
And, you're taking all these memories back. Does it give you a different perspective on looking
Yeah.
at
No, that's good.
Maya as
See, I didn't think it was going to get published, so I put everything in there.
Yeah.
And then when I got the contract, my wife immediately said, you better call it a novel. And I said, I can't do that. But as I was going through revision, and the revision process is really complicated. It goes on a long time, and I kept thinking, I got to take this out now that it's going to get published. I ended up taking nothing out. And they bring in all these, what do you call it, people who look to see for mistakes? What's that called? Yeah. They did things like, there's a memory in Chapter 2 where I see President Kennedy in 1962 driving by my neighborhood. He was going from West Virginia to Pennsylvania to thank those states because they had been key in him getting elected. And my sister said, you want to go see him? And I let her do her thing, and I go by myself. I end up at a place where there's nobody else around. Remember, 1962, there's no freeways yet. So when he goes from Wheeling, West Virginia to Pittsburgh, it's on 4-lane. It's like that road out there for 3 hours. And I'm there by myself for some reason. There's nobody around. And he comes by, and just like you see, the convertible, the top's down, his wife's next to him, and he does these he had neck problems. Remember, and back problems. So he kind of moves like this, And he's waving like there's thousands of people there, and I'm the only one there. And, he said, you better go back and check this, And I looked, on October 12th, it really happened. He went by that day. Then he says, but you said Oredale Road. It's Oredale Boulevard. So things like that, And then the very last chapter, I won't say too much about it, but there's a scene where I'm in a car and some music comes on, and you would know this. The music is by Crimson King. I'm sorry, King Crimson. Of the Crimson King. The song is Court of the Crimson King, yes. And I imagine in the car hearing Court of the Crimson King by Crimson King, King Crimson. See? And he fact-checked it. And he said that album came out in February of 1969. You could not have heard it in that car of October 1968. The book ends in October 1968. I'm 14, freshman year of high school, just started high school. And I said, I've gone along with everything you've said. I want to leave that lie in there because I remember it that way. that Crimson King was playing, Court of the Crimson King, and he said, okay, I'll give you this one. So that's the only thing that's not true in the book that I knowingly left in. And if you ever play that song, Google it tonight. It's so mesmerizing, that song. Oh my gosh. Yeah, Michael's about ready to sing it.
And it is possible it came out early on the radio just as a promotion.
I'm hoping, because I know I heard it in October of '68. I did. He was a great disc jockey for years, so he's going to be my go-to man on this. What was the question? I forgot the question again. Anybody know what the question was? Was there even a question?
How are the chickens?
The chickens.
Here's a question.
Yeah, Michael.
Just to point out a parallel between the memories that you're absolutely certain of and information in black and white photography. And that is, you could take a 60 or 70-year-old black and white photograph and, with the right equipment, extract color information from it. So the information's there. You just need the translator or,
That's cool.
or machinery
Yeah.
to pull out the necessary color.
Yeah.
So your memory, as your siblings' memory, the information's there.
Yeah.
And they just need the trigger or the catalyst.
But you were talking about age group too. Some early publishers were interested early on doing it as a YA book, and I turned them down because I didn't want to go there. I don't think it's a YA book. This is a book about boyhood, for adults. So I think once I made that decision, I don't really think anybody under 16 should read it. But my daughter's going to read it, so we'll see what happens. I'm sure she's already read it. It's been around the house since 2009, and she's not going to just not read it. But
What a gift for her. I mean, how many people get to see their parents in that light? I mean,
yeah,
I don't want to be able to go back and see your parents as they were as children.
yeah.
You're just going to have a much more human view of you, I think.
I think too much, maybe, though, of my past, and I don't know. We'll have to see how it works out. I always worry about something. If I can't find something where I worry about something else. Yes. Yeah.
I hear your Pittsburgh accent just a little bit. How did you?
I was going to do it when I read, but I didn't want to do it badly, so I didn't do it. But it would have been over there, the South Side. You're going over to Giant Eagle Night. Yin's going downtown. I mean, it's real sing-songy, and everything is Yins and Yinzer and South Side, and real whiny. Like, Yin's going over to Skylight Books Night. You're going to that reading. Jeet Jet? Yeah.
A lot of enact.
Yeah.
Enact.
Yeah. You don't have it either.
No, I don't. But my mother has it. She says I live in Elway.
Ah.
Elway.
Yeah, and you wash your clothes and you rid up the room. And
Rid up the room, rid up the house.
what color is that?
Yeah.
What color is that? Yeah. Anybody want one more question? Yes, ma'am.
I'm just wondering, I have a feeling you're much more verbal with your children than your dad was with you.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, his father, he wasn't allowed to talk to. He never talked to me, and he was really depressed and withdrawn. So I had a daughter very late in life. I'm 60 now, so I was 46 when she was born. So when you're an older parent, I think you're even more inclined, to put your life into it. But I think I consciously was super involved to compensate. I think we either repeat our parents' mistakes or we do the absolute opposite of what they did to us. Yeah. And now I worry I was too involved because she needs to let loose. She's 14, she's in high school, and I got to let go, and it's hard. Yeah.
And also I was wondering if the Creely brothers, I wondered what became of them as adults.
Well, there's the two brothers, and they're both sadists, of course. The younger one, who I call Billy Creely, he died, actually, of an aneurysm. He went away to college. He was obnoxious, and he was playing at Allegheny College, and during practice one day, he didn't feel well, collapsed, and died. The other one, who was really perverse, I didn't see him for a long, long time. And believe it or not, I saw him at a wedding about 15 or 18 years ago in Denver, and he was so nice to me. Oh my gosh, he was about engaged and going to get married. And then when this book, I got the contract, and you go through all these things, and Bancroft wanted to do the bullying angle, which I didn't want to do because I never wrote, that wasn't my intention, although bullying goes on in the early chapters. So I had to look into it a little bit. I looked into bullying, and I realized, and I'm sure everybody in the audience is hip to this, either one way or the other, if you've been bullied, you never forget. But if you're the bullier, they don't remember it. They don't remember it. And I don't know, I don't have an answer for you why. Bring in a psychologist or something. But I could see when I saw him at that wedding, he had no idea of the stuff he did, So, that's not my concern about Pittsburgh, though. I'm doing 2 readings in Pittsburgh, and my concern is the last chapter has some pretty unkind things about other kids, and my publicist has been kidding about, you better get in and out of Pittsburgh really quickly, So we'll have to see. Yeah. Well, thank you all. You guys have been great. Thank you very, very much. Fantastic. And bravo.
You've been listening to the Skylight Books author reading series. Don't forget that you can listen to this and all of our other great podcasts at skylightbooks.com. Thanks again for stopping by, and we hope to see you soon.